we might start. So thank you everyone for joining us who's already in the room. There's more trickling in we've just started now. Please, in the chat, would you mind just letting us know where you're located, where you're from, and if you had any sort of issues or remedial or one remedial issue that you might have come across in your travels, and we can we'll just get to know you a little bit more, get to know the audience a little bit more, and then we'll kick off in the slides. Okay, here we go. All right, let's I think we're good to go. All right, so a little bit about us. Danrae, we're a remedial waterproofing contractor. We're a builder, building practitioner, and according to the Design Build Practitioners Act, family owned and operated company, and we've worked across the board, strata, commercial, government projects, and we focus on water related defects. A little bit about me. Here's my lovely family. I'm the CEO of Danrae Group, head of strategy, sales, and team development. I'm also a builder and a waterproofer and a registered building practitioner. I'm also on the committee of the Strata Community of, Association of New South Wales and a committee member of ACRA as well. I have a special guest with me today, Adam Southwell. He is from a company called Credwell. Thank you, Adam, for joining us today, and I will let you do your intro.
All good, thank you. So, as Daniel said, my name's Adam. I work for a company called Credwell, which is a building codes consultancy company. So giving BCA advice, giving advice about fire and life safety, helping out with DACCs, doing upgrade strategies for existing buildings, especially fire safety, and also doing things like expert witness work for building defects cases. I've been a registered building certifier now for 15 years, worked across council, private certification, now working in consultancy and doing expert witness work. I used to be, well, I'm a current member of the Association of Accredited Certifiers, which is the peak body for New South Wales. And I used to sit on the technical committee for the commercial technicals team. And I'm a proud owner of a ginger cat, as you can see under duress in the photo. And my partner and I have a new Groodle who is only about 10 weeks old now. So he is terrorizing the family.
Very cute. Nice. Thank you, Adam. Well, let's jump in. So let's start with a bit of definition. So what is remedial? So remedial in general, but also in construction, generally, identifies and fixes the root cause of a problem on the building, right? Not just the symptoms. So we find that patchwork and repair work often don't actually remediate the problem. So this is what remedial is, and restores and also designed to restore the structural integrity, safety, and performance of the area on a building, and often uses engineered repair methods. We're finding a lot, in particular with class 2. There's the repair methods are designed and engineered in order to ensure long-term durability, and that's part of the reason why the Act came in, the Design Build Practitioners Act came in. The other thing, obviously, it aims to extend the building life, in particular on the work that we're involved in particular with waterproofing. We often find that the approach that we take and the designers take is to ensure that the solution that's put on there is not just looking at the cheapest solution. It's actually looking at the solution to provide the longevity on the structure. And the last thing is it's definitely different from maintenance. So often maintenance is actually forgotten after the remedial work has taken place. Maintenance is only upkeep. It's only there to, I suppose, if it's done right, it can actually also extend the life of a building. But remedial is all about ensuring that let's say in our case we do a lot of roofing. It's designed to then restore the roof, but then ongoing you're doing the maintenance. A lot of what we find is a lot of owners approach us and can't we just do a maintenance program on the roof? Yes, we can, but you're not there to remediate the issue. You're only patching it, or you're only inspecting it. That's what maintenance is. So I just wanted to clear that up so that that'll sort of segue into what Adam's going to address now, which is what remediation work actually requires approval. And so Adam, if you can sort of explain this and from a layperson's point of view, someone new coming into this, what needs what remediation work actually needs that approval process. So explain that to us how that works.
Yeah, so in simple terms, most forms of remediation work is considered building work under New South Wales legislation and means it gets covered by what's called the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, but basically it's the planning and building regulations and acts. So typically when we're doing remediation works, and that's any remediation company, what they should be doing is going through and assessing whether or not it can be done as exempt from needing any approvals under the Act. And there's a specific code called the Exempt and Complying Developments Code, or the CODESEP, that actually has a list of requirements of works that can be done, which doesn't need any form of consent. Doesn't need consent from council, doesn't need a certifier's approval. It also sets out certain approvals or certain works that can be done with only needing the certifier or council issuing a single building approval and not having to go through the DA process. So look. So yeah, we've covered off pretty much everything there, Daniel.
Yep, good. So reasons, for remediation work not being exempt development. This is an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, so the exempt from needing approval requirements under the CODESEP, there's a specific clause that lists a whole lot of reasons why it can't be exempt. We've only picked on a couple of ones, which ones are more common to affect buildings. The first one being is the building is a heritage item. Now, we're not going to get too much into it because heritage items, you need planning advice, you need heritage advisor advice. But there is some ways of getting heritage advice that they can issue exemptions or things to say, yes, you can still do the works for remediation, even though it is a heritage item. The two we are going to focus on is the building requiring to have a fire safety statement before exempt works can progress, and the works having to meet the deemed to satisfy provisions of the building code. So if we go to the next page.
Yeah. So just on this, Adam, on the fire safety statement, which buildings, in your experience, because I know, generally, buildings have these, but in your experience, buildings of a certain age, or when do they, or when do you see that they generally don't have it, the fire safety statement?
Yeah, so well, first off, the fire safety statement is basically required for basically all apartment buildings and is required for all commercial buildings, but it's not required for a standard house, for example. It's not required for a garage, it's not required for a shed, or a small shed that's not being used for commercial use. So we're not talking about remediation for the smaller end of things. We're talking about commercial and high, medium rise residential.
Yeah.
And then if you go to the next slide, because that'll actually pick up that part of it.
Oh, cool. Oh, actually, sorry, before we move on, maybe explain what it is exactly. Sorry.
Yeah. So basically all the buildings within New South Wales that's had a approval to build it is meant to have what is called a fire safety schedule or fire safety statement that a requires basically annual certification of the fire safety systems in the building. So if you have smoke alarms, if you have portable fire extinguishers, if you have sprinklers, hydrants, those type of things, the expectation of the New South Wales government is that the owners of the building employ someone who has got the correct accreditation to be able to go through, inspect the fire safety systems to make sure that they're operating as designed, so that if ever a fire actually happens in the building, the government and the owners should be assured that the systems are currently working as designed. So the fire safety statement has a list of all the measures that are in the building, and it also has the standards of the measures that they need to be certified against, or what they were designed against. So, for example, a hydrant system will say that it requires with certain aspects of the Building Code of Australia, but also it needs to comply with the hydrant standard from the year of when it was actually installed. So the important thing is these systems are not having to be upgraded all the time. They only have to comply with the requirements of when they were actually installed. So if we go to the next page. So a reason why your building may not have a fire safety schedule is, one, a lot of buildings actually predated the requirements for the fire safety schedules. So if you're, say, Eastern Sydney, and you're in a very old part of the city, or you're part of the CBD, some of those buildings actually were constructed and have never been modified prior to these requirements coming out. So, and again, there's plenty of buildings where they just haven't actually been modified in any way, and they're 60, 70, 80, 100 years old. So they've never actually triggered the requirements to actually have these fire safety schedules. The other reason that you might not actually have a fire safety schedule for your building is because all the relevant authorities, including the Owners Corporation of Strata and the council, do not have a copy of the fire safety system on their own systems. In that case, if you don't actually have a fire safety schedule or a fire safety statement, then the exempt code is basically saying you cannot do the works as being exempt. So one thing that can be done to try and get around this requirement is to basically create a list of the essential fire safety measures for the building. So employing a building surveyor or a fire engineer to actually go out and assess the building to determine what systems are installed in the building, and to determine what level of performance they should be working against. And then that way they can write up a schedule of all the systems that are in that building. And then the owners can then go to the accredited practitioner of fire safety, but most people know them as basically the fire safety practitioners or the annual fire safety statement contractors. So the ones who go through every year and certify that the systems comply. And you can take the measures to these contractors and say, we'd like you to actually certify that these systems actually comply in our building. And then once you get that certification from those contractors, you have an active fire safety schedule that can then be lodged with council, can be lodged with the fire brigade, and then can go about the normal annual lodgement process.
Okay. Yeah, nice. So in a situation where there are remedial works to be done, can this process be missed? Like, or have you seen this
It has definitely been missed in remediation jobs before, because it requires people to actually look fairly stringently at the CodeCep and looking at some of the requirements that are not the front of mind requirements you have in the CodeCep, for example. So if you're trying to remediate for your example, might be for a concrete roof where you need to redo all the waterproofing. The first thing you would do is flip through to having a look at the external requirements under the CodeCep. You read through all of those, you go, yep, I'm meeting the waterproofing standard, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But you're not looking at the requirements at the beginning where these are basically hidden. So they can be missed, and they can be, if they are raised with council, it can cause potential for a investigation of some kind.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, gotcha. And then in the remedial process, generally, as a builder, yes, we would, that's part of also our responsibility. But when you look at owners engaging certain people, does it, you know, is it project managers, or consulting engineers generally check it, or we're going down the line? Is that, and then obviously you get involved in the
Yeah.
process too? Yeah, right.
So probably to a certain extent project managers, but definitely engineers when they get involved with the process.
Yeah, right.
If they do find that there is an issue with their fire safety schedules, or if they believe that there's a problem with the fire safety of the building in general, they have been calling us out to go out and have a look at the building just to provide advice. And sometimes if they need the schedule, we'll also prepare the schedule so that they can continue on doing the works without getting cost and time intensive approvals for works that are critical, right? If you've got a leaking roof, if you've got a leaking window or facade or something like that, or you've got a bathroom that is got waterproofing damage, you need to get it fixed.
Yeah.
The longer you leave it, the worse it's going to get. So these are critical works. We need to make sure that they stay on track. So where we can, we're trying to make sure that they're leading towards exempt development.
Gotcha. So, okay, so I've got my FSS in place. I know that's there. And then going to your next slide about deemed to satisfy solutions. You want to talk a little bit about that, because I know that's sort of, that's from the designer's point of view, but in builder, just explaining to the audience, what is DTS, why, this slide's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm assuming that there's some people in the room who don't actually have any, well, in this talk, who don't actually have any experience with the building code or with remediation or anything. So basically, all building works, every building in Australia has to comply with a document called the Building Code of Australia. It's got basically the requirements and the standards that are expected for buildings to comply with if new works are to progress. So the building code is broken up into two basically pathways. One is it's basically a recipe book, and it's called the deemed to satisfy. So if you follow each step in the recipe book, you are deemed by the building code to comply with the requirements. The second pathway that you can do is called performance solution. And that's, let's just say I'm going to use a recipe book and I'm going to say baking a cake, right? If you've got a recipe of how to bake a cake and you follow the recipe, you know you're going to get a cake. However, if you start trying to change some of the ingredients, let's just say you don't want to use plain flour, you want to use potato flour. And you have to make sure that cake is going to work, is going to be edible before you even cook it. You need to talk to someone who knows how to bake cakes and has used potato flour before to actually say, yes, it's going to be a suitable substitute. In the same way, a building, if you're going to build something that is not per the recipe book, you need to talk to an expert, an engineer, a waterproofing expert, or whatever it is, to say, will this work if I do it in the way that is not prescribed? And that's called a performance solution. They will review it, they will then assess it and say, yes, what is being proposed is going X, Y, Z. These are the limitations. And then that goes off to the certifier of the council to review and approve as the case need be. So the exempt requirements on the CodeCEP does not allow performance solutions. And the reason is performance solutions need to be reviewed and signed off either by the council or by a certifier. And the whole idea of exempt work is that exempt is not requiring any approval. You don't need to go to a certifier. You don't need to go to the council. So the government has basically dictated all works that are exempt have to be done per the recipe book of the Building Code of Australia, being the deemed to satisfy.
Gotcha.
So, but as Daniel would know, remediation work is not a recipe book. There's plenty of times where you look at a building, you start doing investigation, you start doing triage, you start trying to find where the problems are, where they exist, and you're coming up with solutions. The solutions sometimes will lead you down a path that says it's not going to be cost effective, or it's not going to be feasible to actually follow the deemed to satisfy provisions of the building code. Under those situations, you then have to either go to council to get a development approval or DA, or go to council or the certified to get a CDC to get the approval.
Yeah. I would say just from our experience though, the engineers that have done remedial work, I actually haven't seen one that's a performance solution. So and I think that's from the owner's perspective. That's part of the reason why remedial has gone so expensive, because the consultants and engineers are approaching it from a DTS perspective. So
Correct.
that's why they're not doing or they're not going down the performance solution path
Yeah, and a lot of it will be because they're trying to keep it deemed to satisfy for the same reasons. You don't
for that
want to
reason.
do a
Yeah, yeah.
DA, you don't want to do a CDC wherever you can help it.
Yep.
Some of it might be that when you get outside of professionals, if people are just going in trying to get things fixed without actually thinking about it, they're probably actually not complying and they're opening, exposing the owners to more risk. It's
Yeah.
because but in terms of if you're getting someone who's a design practitioner like yourself, or getting someone who is a engineer to do the design, they should be going through doing the checks and balances to make sure that yes, it is deemed to satisfy, yes, it can fit under the exempt requirements,
Yep.
or if it's not, well then these are the potential pathways that we need to go down to get the appropriate approvals.
Yeah, right. Which is leading to our
To the
next
next-
slide, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So Uh, I've done some work with the industry group that Daniel said was a part of, the ACRA. Uh, and a part of that work by ACRA was actually doing costings of remediation works. And what they came out with was basically if you're going to do a DA, or if you're required to get a DA for remediation work, it's roughly going to add about $100,000 plus to the project. And it's roughly going to add at least 12 months to the project. Now, a CDC, so the approval by the certifier, is still going to cost around the same as what the DA is, but it's still going to take 6 months to get the approval. And that's from the time of getting all the documents drawn up, getting all the reviews, sending them through to the council and all the certifier, getting them reviewed and signed off. It adds a substantial amount of time and cost to this entire process. And that's when you're talking again about a leaking roof or about a leaking bathroom or about a facade that's no longer working or weatherproof, 6 months or 12 months can be time critical. It can cause further damage. It can cause further issues. It can make the place or the apartments or the building from being barely tenable to the point where basically people can't live in there anymore.
Yep.
So it's a part of the reason why, as Daniel was saying, deemed to satisfy seems to be the way that remediation engineers and design practitioners are leading towards.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Gotcha. So when remedial work begins, yeah, you and I discussed a bit of this topic about design creep. So, and I think this is part of the reason why, again, a lot of remedial work starts with the full design rather than sort of a design and construct model. Because as remedial starts, if the full design and proper sort of investigation on the scope and why things are defective and occurring, what can happen especially in remedial, your costs start to blow out when there's gradual changes during the project, and then there's also design changes during the project, and then that starts to blow out the obviously your costs and then time to complete the project. Um, it does also occur when there's not enough on-site review during construction, and then there's poor communication back to from the sort of the designers or the PM, then circling back to the owners. So what happens is if that process isn't managed very well, it starts to blow out the whole project as well. Any comments on that one as well, Adam, on design creep?
Yeah, there's one also is something that's new to the industry is also design practitioners having to declare their designs now. So basically any building work that happens for apartment buildings, the designers have to declare that the works comply with the building code. So that means that designers are now having to take on more liability than they've ever had to before. And some designers are starting to get worried about when is enough to ensure compliance. When you're if you're renovating a new building and you're stripping everything back, separate to remediation, then you can look holistically at the building as a whole entity. But when you're doing remediation, the intent should always be fixing the problems that are at hand, not fixing the problems that are in the building. So one thing that I have heard of happening but haven't seen as much is that, for example, that you've got let's just say you've got a balcony that it's getting concrete cancer, so it doesn't have any waterproofing. So you need to fix the concrete cancer, you need to fix the waterproofing. But then the design practitioner looks and says, well, there's no stormwater management. The building doesn't have any stormwater issues. The next door neighbors don't have any on-flow issues. But they're now looking at going, well, there's no stormwater, and if I'm declaring against the building code, then the stormwater is no longer compliant. And then if they're trying to fix the stormwater, then you've got to you've got to then direct all that stormwater, which is now being concentrated into a single location off the site. And now you're just adding more and more problems that were never problems to begin with into the design. So it's another point of design creep. So one thing I think is important when you're doing remediation is looking at the problems that are at hand and the problems that are causing damage or issues to the building, and not trying to fix the building in its totality by itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just to point on that, do you see that as an issue, sort of maintaining that DTS pathway? So because we've seen that, right? So when we've come across a roof or a balcony, and it may not, or the area may not have enough, say, overflows or drainage points, like you mentioned, and then you're trying to stop one issue, but then going onto that roof, maintaining that DTS, or the engineer's probably in a bit of a predicament, right? Because they're trying to maintain that DTS pathway.
Well, one example of that that ACRA actually put forward was that there was a balcony. Let's just say it was 10 meters long, and it didn't have sufficient falls to sufficiently drain the water from the balcony. So to fix that, they then need to introduce falls to the balcony, 1 in 100. But by doing that, they're going to raise the floor at the far end of the balcony by 100 mils. That then caused the water stop angle at the doors to no longer comply, because they're then raising the floors for something that actually didn't have any water ponding issues. They then had to raise it so that it complied, which then caused issues with the water stop. And that also caused issues with the balustrades, because the balustrades were no longer compliant height.
Yeah.
So you've fixed one problem that wasn't really an issue, and now you've caused 2 more problems. And then you go through and you fix those issues, and then you've caused 3 or 4 more problems. And before you know it, your scope of maybe just fixing some tiles on a balcony has now turned into a $5 million job across the site, because you've now extended the scope to try and get compliance of things that weren't actually issues.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, that's really interesting. So we are ready to open up to questions. So first slide here, quick QR code on feedback. This will take you to a Google review. If you want to quickly snap that one, and please start posting questions that you may have in the chat box. I've got some that's already been sent in, which I'm happy to read from. But please, to the audience, if you've got anything burning you want to ask us, please put it in the chat now. And I'll go to one question that's interesting. I don't know if you want to comment on the new NCC yet, but Adam, one question that got posted in is I believe the new NCC is excluding screeds in some instances and will require falls in slabs. Will this impact waterproofing applications? So I know this is a big one, right?
Yeah,
So
it's a big
I
one.
know we probably can't answer it in full, but I mean you've obviously got some experience on going through the new standard. But yeah, if you want to comment maybe on.
Yeah. So this is one that I actually did. This is one that industry has raised with the New South Wales government. Uh, Basically, the requirement in the latest version of the building code, which is going to be adopted next year, requires a structural substrate for your waterproofing for your roofs and your balconies and the rest. So that basically means that you already have to have had the concrete down, which is basically impossible for when you're got an existing building. If it's timber framing, if it is an existing concrete building that didn't already have the falls, you cannot comply with it.
Yeah,
That immediately pushes most remediation for waterproofing in New South Wales to performance solutions if it gets adopted. So, which means that we no longer can exempt all the rest of it. The New South Wales government has been made aware of this. We still don't know if they're going to give variations to requiring remediation to comply with that requirement. So the discussions has been around whether or not an exemption will be given to remediation to not comply with this structural substrate requirements. If they don't do it, then it is going to significantly impact on the ability for the waterproofing to be fixed, and it's going to significantly impact on costs.
right. Is that regardless? Like, what about like things like engineered screeds, things like that?
I
From
haven't looked
I
too
know,
much further into that. You
yeah,
probably actually know more than I would, but
yeah.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, cool. So that's still a grey area. I'll admit that that's still a bit of a from what I know anyway. I could be
yeah.
wrong, but from what I understand, they're still looking into that requirement of using structural based screeds or yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard of some other inventive ways of trying to get around it because everyone knows that it's a problem. So structural, I don't think the structural screed or the structural substrate is actually very well defined from memory.
Yeah,
So
right.
whether or not a timber framing or a steel framing can be installed and then the screed
I
be
see.
put on top of that,
Gotcha.
it's yeah, we're just going to have to wait till the new building code gets adopted and whether or not the New South Wales government allows variations.
Yeah, gotcha. And then we'll work it out from there. I'm gonna flick over to the next slide, which is the CPD point. If you want to snap that, the audience can snap that to get a CPD point as well. And we'll keep going with some more questions. So we've had one post in. Sorry, I don't know the name. It just comes up as home. So we have an engineer overseeing and supervising the planning for replacing a roof membrane. What sort of practitioner assesses the DTS? Do you want to go over that? I mean, I know
Yeah.
what it's actually the design practitioner that should design the work to deem to satisfy.
So yeah, and by design practitioner, that can be the engineer, it can be
Yeah,
another designer that's been outsourced. Whoever's doing that actual design work is preparing the plans, the specifications,
yeah,
should be someone who is registered with the New South Wales government to do that type of design.
yeah. And then the building practitioner um, will then declare that they have installed the work according to the design. Basically, they then declare that on the portal as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question on that one. Next question is, you mentioned that unearthing possible concerns that may not be causing any problems at the time. Is there a legal obligation to rectify these?
Yeah. So our answer is basically we can't really give legal advice.
Yep.
Um, I do expert witness work. You get drummed to a lot by the lawyers that you basically can't give legal advice in this. You're best to, if you think you've got concerns about your building in terms of if there's any problems there, probably talk to your strata managers whether or not they actually want to get legal advice regarding it, and or whether or not it's something that you actually think needs to be rectified. If it's serious enough that you think it needs to be rectified, then you probably should be having the conversations about actually getting that ball rolling.
Yeah, cool. Um, let's see. I've got another question here. Will a PCA certify balcony remediation works on a 60-year-old balcony without waterproofing? Oh, I'm I don't.
Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question. So if the design practitioner has ensured that the works are exempt and that they're deemed to satisfy, so they don't we're not needing any variations to the building code,
Yep.
then you don't need a certifier to actually certify the actual works. If for some reason you actually don't meet the exempt requirements anymore and you do need a development approval or a complying development certificate, then a certifier would be required. And the age of the building, all the rest of it is sort of irrelevant. If building works require approval, then you need to get a certifier to actually sign it off.
Okay. So to add to that previous question, our engineer has indicated that they don't contact council regarding DA, etc. So who does that? We now have an architect involved who has brought on Hampton, so becoming confusing. So it's becoming confusing.
Yeah, okay. So the exempt requirements are effectively self-certifying. Council will not let you, council will not tell you whether or not the works that you're doing are exempt development. They will tell you, however, if you need development consent. So it's a bit of a roundabout way, but the designers should be checking themselves and coming to their own conclusions whether or not the works are exempt from needing any approvals. And if you have concerns or if they have concerns whether or not they actually should be making that determination themselves, then they can go talk to a town planner. They can talk to a certifier.
Okay. Nice. I'll put our contact details up there too soon as well. There we go. If there's no other questions, I'd like to say, yeah, a big thank you to Adam. Thank you so
Yep.
much for joining us today. And thank you to the audience. I really appreciate your attendance. Look out for our next one. So we do these monthly, as I mentioned. So there'll be another one coming very soon. And just yeah, just reach out to us if you've got any questions whatsoever. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Daniel, for putting it
Thank
on.
you. Thanks, Adam.